welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. We are so glad you're back with us today. We are on episode 96. It is hard to believe we have covered this much ground. Today we are going to be talking about the building of the temple. Solomon's going to build it. You might remember that David wanted to build a temple for the Lord, but was told not to, but that his son would do it. And we're going to be in 1 Kings 5 and 6. And the parallel text is 2 Chronicles 2, 3, and 4. We're not going to read all of those chapters because it's the same stuff, but I will point out one thing from 2 Chronicles that I think is significant. And so 1 Kings chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father David, for Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, "You know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord is my God and has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. So I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. As the Lord said to David my father, your son who I have set on your throne in your place will build me a sure house. Now therefore command that the cedars of Lebanon," which is an incredible image that's used throughout the Bible. I'll list more in the blogs. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the blog post, but I've listed a couple here for you. So the cedars of Lebanon is a reference to several different things throughout the scripture, and it's usually a blessing. So we'll look at that in the blog more. Verse 6, "Now therefore command that the cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and that my servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for your servants such wages as you set, for you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." So he's like, look, you guys are really great at logging. Would you be willing to log all the trees for us? I'll pay you. Whatever you need me to pay you, I'll pay you for it. But we'd really like the cedars of Lebanon. As soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, "Blessed be the Lord this day, who has given to David a wise son to be over his great people." Why is Hiram suddenly so excited? Well, remember, Hiram loved David, but now Hiram's about to benefit from Solomon's riches. Hiram sent to Solomon and said, "I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I am ready to do all you desire in the matter of the cedars and the cypress timber. My servants will bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place that you direct, and I will have them broken up there, and you shall receive it, and you shall meet my wishes by providing the food for my household." So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypresses that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, 20,000 cores of oil, and Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all the men of Israel, and he drafted 30,000 men, and he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts, and there would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. So if you think about it, not a terrible job, right? You go work in Lebanon for a month, and then you get 2 months at home before it's your shift again. Adoniram was in charge of the draft, and Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hill country. Besides, Solomon had 3,300 chief officers who were over all the work and who had charge of the people who carried on the work. Now, one of the things I will point out here is that Samuel said to the people back in 1 Samuel 8, when they rejected God as king and they said, "Give us a king." He said, "Okay, you can have a king, but here's what's going to happen. That king is going to take your men and your sons and your daughters and conscribe them to his labor." And that's what's happening here. At the king's command, they quarried out great costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house. Now, I love this because I like details and I like the timeline. Chapter 6, in the 480th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So this has been a long time since we've done this back in Deuteronomy, Joshua, Exodus, and so forth. We don't know the day here, okay? But it's the 2nd month of the 480th year since they came out of Egypt in Exodus 12. 480 years. Now, we had 40 years for King David. We had 40 years for King Solomon, right? 40 years for King Saul. We have 4 years for King Solomon. He's in his 4th year. Prior to that, we had approximately 350 years in of the judges. So what does that give us? That gives us 434. Plus you have 6 years of the conquest. That gives us, what did I say? 434? Yeah, 434, 440. And then plus you had the 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And so you kind of get 430. Yeah, so that gives us our 480. There we are. I said it wrong. I did my math wrong because I was doing it on the spot, and I know that I should have done this ahead of time and been prepared, but I wasn't. And so you have 480 years here that 480 years here from, remember, 40 years wandering in the wilderness, 6 years of conquest, 350 years of judges, 40 years of King Saul, 40 years of King David, and 4 years of King Solomon gives us 480 years, which is how I got the 350 years of judges, if you were wondering that back in the day. So the house that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long and 20 cubits wide, 30 cubits high. So that's 90 feet by 30 feet, if you're counting. The vestibule, wow, I was going to say that way wrong, in front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits long, equal to the width of the house, and 10 cubits deep. And he made for the house windows. So I am not going to read to you the entire parameters of this house and how long it was and what the windows looked like and all of that. That would be a really boring episode. And so I will say this. It says here that when the house was built, it was with stone prepared at the quarry so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the house while it was being built. So I want you to think about this. They didn't do any of the work on site in Jerusalem in terms of chiseling the stone or cutting any of the timber. They did all of that further away and then brought the prepared stones and the prepared timber to Jerusalem to assemble it so that no hammer or axe or any iron tool was heard in Jerusalem. We're not told why that was so significant. I think Solomon wanted to kind of like make it a holy place or something, right? He's building the temple of the Lord. It goes on to say this in verse 9. So he built the house and finished it, and he made the ceiling of the house of the beams and planks of cedars. He built the house and finished it. You should know, we'll see this in just a second, that it took him 7 years. This wasn't like, on a Tuesday he started it and by Friday, they'd finished. This was a 7-year project. And it says this in verse 11, now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house that you are building. If you will walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all of my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. And I will dwell among the children of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house and finished it. He lined the walls of the houses and the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the walls and the ceiling, he covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the floor of the house with boards of cypress. And then listen to what he says here. So the inner sanctuary he prepares for the Ark of the Covenant. This is very interesting to me. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 wide. So that's 30 by 30 by 30, 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet tall. And he also overlaid the altar of cedar. And Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with gold. And he drew curtains of gold all across the front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. And he overlaid the entire house with gold until the entire house was finished. Also the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary, he overlaid with gold. And the inner sanctuary, he made 2 cherubim, each 10 feet or 10 cubits high. So that's 15 feet tall. So he makes these 2 cherubim in the inner sanctuary, right? The inner sanctuary, Holy of Holies, 30 by 30, 30 feet tall. He makes 15-foot tall cherubim, each with a 15-foot wingspan. So their 2 wings are touching in the middle and their outer wings are touching the walls. And then underneath that is sitting the Ark of the Covenant, which has 2 cherubim carved into the lid of it. And so it's just an immaculate thing. And he builds these 2 angels 15 feet tall with 15 feet wingspans and covers them in gold. The entire thing is covered in gold. And it says that in verse 27, he put the cherubim in the innermost part of the house, and the wings of the cherubim were spread out so that the wing of one touched the wall of touched one wall, and the wing of the other cherub touched the other wall, and their 2 wings touched in the middle of the house. And he overlaid the cherubim with gold all around the walls of the house. He carved and engraved figures of cherubim and palm trees and flowers. The floor of the house he overlaid with gold in the inner and the outer rooms. So the floors are laid with gold. The walls are laid with gold. He has gold curtains, chains of gold hanging to divide the Holy of Holies from the main room. And he's got I'm just telling you, this thing is insane, right? He covers the doors with gold. He makes for the entrance places of washing. He builds what he calls the sea. And it holds, depending on depending on the measurements, it holds anywhere from 18 to 24 gallons of, 18,000 to 24,000 gallons of water. And it's this huge thing called the sea. And it sits on the back of 12 oxen that he made. And he has 3 facing north and 3 facing south and 3 facing east and 3 facing west. And it's for the priests to purify themselves in. And there's these 2 pillars that he builds that are 27 feet tall. And on top of them, he has 6-foot lilies cast in gold. And around the tops of the pillars, he has 100 pomegranates. And he names one of the pillars Jachin and one of the pillars Boaz. And this place, it's gold everywhere. It's nuts. This is the most extravagant temple ever. Anybody want to guess what happens when the enemies of God eventually attack Jerusalem? Anybody want to guess what they go for? The walls and the floor of the temple, right? So he builds this inner court, builds the temple, and it says this, look, in the 11th month, in the month of Buell, which is the 8th month, the house was finished, all of its parts, and he spent 7 years building it. So he starts building it in the 2nd month of his 4th year as king, and he'll finish in the 8th month of his 11th year as king, so 7.5 years total to build it. He'll spend 14 years building his own house. But anyway, he lays the foundation in the 4th year. In the 11th year, he finishes it, 7.5 years. And then look, this is what I've been hinting at all along. And some of you, I appreciate it. You're asking me, how do we know this? And how do we know that? Always do that. Always ask me questions, because I want you to know the answers. I want you to understand the answers. So please always ask your questions. If you're wondering how I arrived at a conclusion, please ask so that I can tell you, because I want us to understand the Bible better. So I told you the parallel text is 2 Chronicles 3, 2 Chronicles chapters 2, 3, and 4. I'm not going to read the whole thing again. You want some more details on the measurements of these things, go read that. But I want us to look at 2 verses, or really 1 verse here, the first verse of 2 Chronicles 3. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father at the place David had appointed on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Remember, a few days ago, I told you that when David made that altar it doesn't tell us in that story in 2 Samuel 24. It doesn't tell us in 1 Chronicles 21 that that's Mount Moriah. It just says that David built an altar there at the threshing floor of Araunah of Ornan. It doesn't tell us that's Mount Moriah. So you might have thought, well, Ryan's just making that up. And I would appreciate that if you thought that. I would get that, okay? Here's how we know that. Here's how we know it's Mount Moriah. So what do we know about Mount Moriah? Remember Genesis 22, it's where Abraham says, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. And then in 2 Samuel 24, 1 Chronicles 21, it's the threshing floor of Ornan, also known as Araunah, where David builds an altar to the Lord, where sacrifices begin to be held. It is now where the temple is going to be built, and it is just outside the temple gates where Christ will be crucified on Mount Moriah. And so Solomon builds the temple here, and it ties all of this together for us. And it's amazing, and it's beautiful, and literally it's beautiful. There's torches in this thing that are never to be put out. The altar has the fire constantly burning in it. And I'm a storyteller. I like to think through these things. I want you to imagine this temple, what it must have looked like at night, with the light bouncing off the gold as you walk into this temple, and the light is just radiating and bouncing back and forth off of these gold walls and shining out into the darkness. Pretty spectacular. But the mistake that I made in my 20s was I was more impressed with Solomon's temple than I was with Moses' tent of meeting. But don't forget that in Exodus 25, verse 9 and verse 40, we are told that the tent of meeting is a picture of heaven, a representation of heaven. And this temple does not have that same kind of magnitude applied to it, even though it is incredibly more beautiful physically as a temple. So anyway, Solomon builds the temple. It takes about 7.5 years for that to happen. He's doing that to fulfill what God had promised to David. And if you would, please join me tomorrow in 2 Chronicles 5 through 7, as we will pick up in episode 97. We'll see you then. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.